Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when someone accustomed to giving orders, being obeyed and admired, enters a place where not everything revolves around money? What if, in that same space, the person they least notice is precisely the one who changes everything? What you're about to discover might surprise you and perhaps make you rethink how we look at people every day. That morning, the university was different. It wasn't an ordinary day of classes, exams, or hurried hallways. There was an air of anticipation, almost as if something big was about to happen. Professors whispered, staff adjusted details that would normally go unnoticed, and some students tried to understand why so many eyes were focused on the main entrance of the campus. In a few minutes, the reason would become clear. A billionaire was arriving. A well-known name in the business world, synonymous with power, influence, and decisions that move millions. Someone accustomed to entering any place and being treated as the ultimate authority. When the luxury car pulled up in front of the main building, it seemed as if time slowed down. Doors opened, greetings were rehearsed, smiles appeared with almost automatic speed. Money, when it enters an environment like that, tends to change people's behavior. The billionaire walked with firm steps, a confident look, surrounded by advisors and those who wanted to be seen by his side. It was the kind of presence that commands respect, even before a word is spoken. After all, he wasn't just a visitor. He was a potential sponsor, an investor, someone capable of defining the future of entire projects at that university. Meanwhile, elsewhere on campus, far from the imaginary flashes and exaggerated attention, a black woman walked down the hallway with a simple briefcase in her hands. A professor, a common routine, lessons to prepare, students to guide, responsibilities that don't make headlines or elicit flattery. Her step was calm, her gaze attentive to her surroundings, like someone who knows the place intimately. To most, she was just another professor among many, invisible to those who only see status, positions, and appearances. This contrast is important. On one hand, there's the power that arrives with a bang, inspiring reverence, creating expectations. On the other, there's the discreet presence of someone who doesn't need to announce who they are to exist in that space. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever been in an environment where some people seem to be valued more simply for what they appear to have, while others are ignored, even though they carry stories, achievements, and authority that few imagine? The billionaire walked his way through the university corridors with the nonchalance of someone who believed that everything there, in some way, also belonged to him. His gaze swept quickly over the people, classifying, judging, deciding who deserved attention and who could be ignored. He was used to this. In his world, respect is bought, positions are imposed, and those who don't fit the expected mold simply don't matter. At least, that's how he thought. The teacher, for her part, observed that unusual activity from afar, without haste, without excessive curiosity. For her, that space had always been more than just showcases of power or games of influence. It was a place of silent decisions, of real responsibilities, and of truths that didn't need to be proclaimed aloud. Stay with me until the end of this story, because the encounter between these two worlds was closer than anyone could imagine. At that moment, no one there seemed to realize that the scene was being carefully set for something much bigger than a simple visit from a distinguished guest. What appeared to be merely the arrival of a powerful man at a respected university concealed a social upheaval that would completely change the course of that story. And while the billionaire advanced confidently, oblivious to those crossing his path, fate was already preparing the clash between arrogance and a truth he never expected to face. And perhaps that's precisely why stories like this need to be told calmly, without haste, so that every detail makes sense. Because before any humiliation, before any twist, there is that silent moment when power believes it is in absolute control, without imagining how much it is about to be confronted. While the billionaire walked through the corridors with the certainty of someone who had never been contradicted, the university continued its routine, as if it knew that something was about to go off the rails. And it is at this point that the story begins to touch on something bigger, something that goes beyond positions, money, or titles. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Perhaps you've experienced a similar situation. Maybe you've been underestimated, ignored, or judged by your appearance, tone of voice, or the place you were in at that moment. Sharing this isn't just a way to vent, it's a way to show that these stories are real, happen every day, and deserve to be seen and heard. When you comment, you help this message gain strength and reach other people who also need to reflect on respect, dignity, and justice. And if while listening to this story you feel that tightness in your chest, that mixture of indignation and curiosity, go ahead and leave a like. This simple gesture helps the video reach further and shows that this type of content, which provokes reflection and real conversation, is worth continuing to exist. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with stories of poetic justice, social upheavals, and truths that many people prefer to pretend not to see. If you're not already subscribed, perhaps now is the time, not as a commitment, but as a sign that you want to continue following narratives that give voice to those who have been silenced and reveal what only appears when the mask of power falls. By subscribing, you become part of this community that doesn't just watch for the sake of watching, but feels, reflects, and learns together. And you can be sure many more stories like this will come through here. Because while the billionaire continued confidently, believing he controlled every step of the visit, the scene continued to unfold in silence. The professor approached, their eyes began to meet, and what had seemed like just another formal event began to take on the contours of something much bigger, and it is precisely from this encounter that everything begins to change. The atmosphere changed the instant their paths finally crossed. There was no announcement, no formal introduction, just that seemingly ordinary encounter, the kind that goes unnoticed when no one imagines the impact it carries. The billionaire paused for a second, quickly analyzing who was in front of him, as if evaluating something. Without strategic value, his gaze wasn't merely indifferent, it was laden with judgment, a silent certainty of superiority. To him, that black woman, with her firm posture and serene expression, represented nothing more than an out-of-place detail in that scenario, which in his mind revolved around power, influence, and decisions he believed he controlled. The first comment came casually, almost automatically, the kind that hurts more through its naturalness than its explicit aggression. Pointed question, a poorly worded order, a mistaken assumption about who she was or what her role should be there. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The arrogance was in the subtext, in the way he looked away immediately afterward, as if her presence didn't deserve to continue. Some around noticed, others pretended not to. The silence began to weigh heavily. She stood still, listening, absorbing every word, every gesture. There was no surprise on her face, only a disconcerting in calmness. Those who observed more closely could sense that this wasn't the first look of disdain she had faced in her life. The difference was that, in that specific scene, something was about to take on a much greater significance. As the billionaire continued speaking, questioning her authority, mistaking her for someone unimportant, the atmosphere seemed to shrink. The air grew thick. Eyes met, searching for a reaction, a defense, anything that would break the collective awkwardness. And it is at this point that the humiliation becomes even more cruel, because it wasn't just a personal offense. It was a reflection of a mentality shaped by privilege, by decisions made behind closed doors, by a lifetime of not being challenged. He spoke as if he had never needed to explain himself, as if he believed that people's worth could be measured by their appearance. their visible position, or their immediate usefulness. That woman, for him, didn't fit into any of those superficial criteria. Therefore, she didn't deserve respect. Some teachers looked away. Staff pretended to be busy. No one interrupted. The collective silence at that moment is also humiliating. It validates the mistake, reinforces the idea that that behavior is acceptable. And perhaps that's why this scene hurts so much for those who watch it, because it's not a distant story. It's a mirror of situations that are repeated daily, behind the scenes in companies, universities, hospitals, and public offices. People being diminished, not for what they do, but for who someone decides they are. She could have reacted. She could have defended herself, raised her voice, demanded respect. But she chose something more difficult: to remain whole. Her silence was not submission. It was strategy. It was awareness. There was a hidden truth there that had not yet been revealed, and she knew it. Every second of that embarrassment was part of a journey that the billionaire couldn't see. While he believed he was in control of the situation, in reality he was exposing before everyone his own limited vision. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this kind of humiliation doesn't come from nowhere. It's built up over a lifetime of unquestioned certainties, decisions made without empathy, and an internal transformation that never happened. The impact of that moment wasn't just in what was said, but in what was revealed without words. The fragility of a power that depends on despising others to feel great. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became that that scene wasn't about her. It was about him, about his mentality, his prejudices, and the emptiness hidden behind an image of undeniable success. The woman in turn seemed to carry a silent strength built over time, a strength that comes from someone who has already traveled a long journey of invisible confrontations, who has learned to transform pain into preparation, humiliation into clarity, silence into impact. She knew that space much better than he imagined. She knew its corridors, its decisions, its backstage, and each look of contempt she received there only reinforced the contrast between what seemed to be and what really was. The seconds ticked by slowly. The awkwardness grew, and even without anyone saying anything, everyone felt that something was out of place. That encounter, which began as just another automatic gesture of arrogance, was becoming a breaking point, a revelation about to emerge, a truth that, when it came to light, would completely change the weight of that humiliation and the meaning of every word spoken there. If this part of the story resonated with you, comment below. This makes sense to me. She took a deep breath, but not as if trying to hold back. It was an almost imperceptible, natural gesture from someone comfortable within themselves. While the billionaire still held that look of disdain, perhaps expecting a reaction, a hasty explanation, or even an apology that would confirm his sense of superiority, what he found was something he didn't know how to handle: silence. A firm, organized silence, without tension. There was no anger, no fear, no need to prove anything, and this, curiously, began to disarm the atmosphere. The teacher maintained an upright posture, a calm gaze, like someone listening without diminishing herself. She didn't try to justify herself, didn't explain who she was, didn't correct the mistaken assumption he had made. To an outside observer, this might seem like passivity, but there was something different there, a tranquility that doesn't stem from insecurity, but from certainty. Those who have traveled a long inner journey recognize this kind of calm. It doesn't come from the absence of conflict, but from constant coexistence with it. It's the calm of someone who has faced worse stares, harsher words, doors slammed shut with more violence, and survived it all without losing their own identity. The billionaire, accustomed to gauging reactions as signs of power, seemed slightly disconcerted. He had expected submission or confrontation. Silence wasn't part of the plan. And when silence appears, it forces the other person to listen to themselves. Every arrogant word spoken seconds before began to resonate differently. The weight was no longer on her, but on him. And that changes everything. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this kind of posture reveals something that goes beyond that specific scene. It reveals an internal transformation, a mindset built over difficult decisions, made away from the spotlight. The professor didn't need to assert herself because she was already whole. Her control didn't come from a visible position, but from a hidden truth that she carried naturally. Small details betrayed this. The way she observed her surroundings, how she recognized the faces around her, how she didn't seem out of place or intimidated. There was a silent familiarity with that space that the billionaire didn't yet possess. When someone commented in the background trying to break the tension, she responded with few words, polite, almost enigmatic, nothing that explained too much, nothing that defended herself. Just enough to leave the feeling that the story wasn't complete. Those who heard it felt it. Something didn't add up. The numbers didn't add up. And this doubt began to circulate among the attentive eyes of those watching the scene. Curiosity took hold. After all, why would someone seemingly unimportant demonstrate such confidence in the face of a clear attempt at devaluation? Her silence began to take on meaning. It wasn't empty. It was full of context, of behind-the-scenes details, of decisions the billionaire was completely unaware of. He spoke from a position of power he believed to be absolute. She listened from a much deeper place, where power doesn't need to be announced. This difference in mentality is subtle, but devastating when it reveals itself. Because while one depends on the other's reaction to assert themselves, the other simply exists without asking permission. Some around began to notice this invisible reversal. The atmosphere changed again. It was no longer just embarrassment, it was anticipation. As if everyone felt they were facing something bigger than a misunderstanding or an isolated rudeness. There was a journey about to unfold, an impact that wouldn't come with shouts or confrontations, but with a simple truth, exposed at the right moment. And the most curious thing is that she seemed to know exactly when that moment would arrive. The billionaire, still unaware, continued to believe he was in control of the situation. But control had already silently shifted. Every second she remained calm, every restrained gesture, every minimal response strengthened the feeling that this woman knew something he didn't. And when someone realizes this too late, the fall is usually proportional to the initial arrogance. This is one of those situations where silence speaks louder than any speech. It reveals character, reveals preparedness, reveals a strength built far from immediate recognition. The professor didn't need to introduce herself. She didn't need to raise her voice. Everything about her indicated that the story was only beginning to unfold. And the more serene she remained, the clearer it became that this scene wouldn't end the way the billionaire imagined when he entered that corridor with such self-assurance. The atmosphere, now tense, seemed to hold its collective breath. Something was about to emerge from behind the scenes of that situation. A revelation that would give new meaning to every look of disdain, every poorly chosen word, every ignored silence. And the way she awaited that moment showed that it wasn't about revenge, but about justice in due time, the kind that transforms not only the scene, but the understanding of all who watch. If this silent stance made you reflect, comment below. I'm on this journey too. The silence that dominated the corridor was broken by an almost banal detail, one of those that would normally go unnoticed if the atmosphere weren't so heavy. One of the university directors approached, with cautious steps, looking first at the billionaire and then at the professor, as if weighing the exact weight of each word before uttering it. The atmosphere seemed suspended in time, the air thick, and it was in that minimal interval, in that space between what seemed to be and what truly was, that the truth began to emerge. He cleared his throat, straightened his posture, and with a respect that had not been seen until then in that scene, addressed her by her full name. A name that sounded neither common nor improvised. It sounded institutional, official. There was a short pause, but enough for some eyes to widen discreetly. Then he completed the sentence with a title that fell like a weight on the floor. President of the board, the highest authority of the university, the person responsible for strategic decisions, investments, agreements, including the one that the billionaire believed he was there to easily manage. For a second, no one reacted. The shock didn't come in the form of noise, but in absolute silence. A silence heavier than any previous humiliation. The billionaire took a while to process it. His eyes, once full of certainty, now sought confirmation in the faces around him. But there was no mistake. There was no exaggeration. The woman he had underestimated, ignored and treated as someone irrelevant, was, in fact, the person with the most decision-making power in that space. The transformation was visible. His face lost its color. His body, once relaxed and confident, stiffened. His mind, accustomed to controlling scenarios, seemed to race in search of a logical solution that didn't exist. All the words spoken minutes before returned like an unsettling echo. Each look of contempt now carried a very high emotional cost. The game had turned, and not gradually, but abruptly, definitively. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this revelation isn't just a powerful plot twist. It exposes something essential about mindset, about how decisions based on appearance and prejudice build silent traps. The billionaire wasn't defeated by her at that moment. He was confronted by himself, by the image he had constructed of the world, where power always presents itself in an obvious, noisy, visible way. And there, before him, was living proof that true power often walks in silence. The professor, now revealed as the board president, maintained the same demeanor as before. No triumphant smile, no need to assert herself, just the same unwavering calm, now illuminated by a truth that no longer needed to be hidden. She hadn't changed because she had never been inferior. The only thing that changed was his perception. And that change came too late to avoid the impact. Some around looked away, others watched with almost reverent attention. The atmosphere was one of collective embarrassment, but also of silent learning. The power shift wasn't theatrical. It was real, raw, inevitable. The billionaire tried to say something, but the words wouldn't form. Any attempt to regain control would sound false, rehearsed, insufficient. For the first time in that environment, he wasn't the center of attention. He was simply someone dealing with the consequences of his own choices. This is the power of a hidden truth when it finally comes to light. It rearranges everything around it. It rewrites the meaning of every previous gesture. That silent journey of the teacher, built behind the scenes, now revealed itself not as revenge, but as justice. A justice that doesn't humiliate for pleasure, but teaches through impact. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. It was enough to exist in the place that had always been hers. The billionaire understood at that moment that his presence there depended less on his money and more on the approval of the woman he had tried to diminish. The feeling of absolute control dissolved. What remained was discomfort, forced reflection, the belated realization that not all power bows to capital. Some authorities are built in silence, along a journey that doesn't ask for applause, but delivers results. And while the atmosphere was still trying to absorb that revelation, it was clear that the meeting wouldn't end there. The decisions that would follow would carry the weight of this reversal. Nothing would ever be the same again. Respect was no longer optional. It was inevitable. And how each person reacted to this new reality would say a lot about who was truly prepared to remain there. If this power shift made you think, comment below. This makes sense to me. What remained after that moment was not just the embarrassment etched on the face of a powerful man, nor the silent confirmation of that woman's authority, What lingered was something deeper, more unsettling and yet necessary, the raw exposure of how prejudice, arrogance, and superficial judgments shape behaviors, decisions, and destinies. That scene was not an isolated accident. It was a reflection of a mentality that repeats itself in many places, every day, away from the cameras, behind the scenes of real life. When someone believes they can measure another person's worth by their appearance, skin color, tone of voice, or clothing, that person reveals more about themselves than they realize. The billionaire didn't fall there for lack of money or influence. He stumbled over his own certainty. He believed that power always announces itself, always imposes itself, always presents itself in an obvious way. And this is one of the most common traps of arrogance. It creates a narrow worldview where anything that deviates from the norm is automatically discarded. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this story only works so well emotionally because it touches on something that many people prefer to avoid. How many times, without realizing it, do we repeat this same pattern on a smaller scale? How many times have we judged someone before listening, before getting to know them, before understanding the journey that person has taken? The truth is that most great transformations begin precisely when we are confronted with these uncomfortable questions. The teacher didn't need to humiliate in return. She didn't need to use her position as a weapon. The poetic justice of that situation lies precisely in this. The one who tried to belittle ended up being forced to confront their own ignorance, not as a spectacle, but as an inevitable lesson. The impact was silent, yet profound. And this type of impact doesn't end at the moment of revelation. It continues to reverberate in subsequent decisions, in changing perspectives, in attitudes that are reconsidered, even if no one admits it aloud. This story speaks directly to the lives of those who watch it, because it doesn't rely on extremes to be true. Perhaps you've never crossed paths with a billionaire in a university hallway, but you've probably been in a room where someone was ignored. You've witnessed a snide comment. You've felt the weight of a judgmental gaze. Or at some point, perhaps you were the one who judged. And recognizing this isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of awareness. Respect, in the end, has never been about social standing. It's a daily choice, a decision that reveals character. Appearances are deceiving. Visible titles tell only part of the story. True journeys are built in silence, with consistency, facing closed doors, veiled prejudices, and challenges that rarely surface. And when these journeys finally intersect with arrogance, the result is usually this kind of clash. Uncomfortable, transformative, and impossible to ignore. The lesson that echoes from this story isn't about who won. It's about what was revealed, about how the world insists on reminding us, sometimes in harsh ways, that no one is simply what they appear to be, that decisions made based on shallow judgments almost always exact a price, and that, sooner or later, every humiliation returns like a mirror, forcing those who inflicted it to confront what they tried to hide behind power. While the atmosphere remained silent, digesting everything that had happened, it was clear that this was not a story that ended there. The consequences of that encounter would still unfold behind the scenes, in private conversations, in future decisions. Because when a truth comes to light like that, it doesn't just transform a moment. It changes entire trajectories, even when no one openly discusses it. Before we move on with this reflection, it's worth noting something here. If this story made you think about respect, judgment, or similar situations you've experienced or witnessed, write a word or phrase in the comments that summarizes how you felt, such as, "This makes sense to me." If you've made it this far, it's because this story has truly resonated with you on some deeper level. And when content manages to provoke reflection, awaken discomfort, and at the same time bring clarity, it's worth continuing down this path. Subscribing to the channel is precisely that. choosing to keep following stories that reveal behind-the-scenes aspects, expose hidden truths, and help you see the world with a little more awareness and humanity, without haste and without superficiality. If you feel like it, leave a simple comment here, just so I know you stayed until the end. You can write something like, "This message was for me," or "I'm with you until the end." These comments create a space for real exchange, show that this conversation doesn't happen on its own, and help keep this kind of content alive that goes beyond the obvious. And if this narrative resonated with you, if at any point you recognized yourself in it, leave a like, not as an obligation, but as a sign of connection that this story found you on the other side of the screen. This gesture helps the video reach more people who also need to hear something like this at the right time. There's a video over here that complements this topic and delves even deeper into these reflections. Click on it and continue the conversation there. There's still much more to reveal.